Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to Uncommon Sense. I'm June Udone. Thank you for joining us today. My guest today is Mike Kelly, Director of the Conservation Fund's Great Lake office in Bay City, and prior to that, the City Manager of Auburn. Well, Mike, so what is the Conservation Fund focused on? What is it actually?
Yeah, the Conservation Fund was established in 1985, and we're headquartered out in Virginia, out on the East Coast. We probably only have 150 employees, half of which are there. The rest of us are scattered across the country. Perhaps our biggest claim to fame is our real estate work. Historically, we've done a lot of work acquiring and protecting lands and transferring those lands to National Park Service, to cities, communities, for conservation purposes and so that people can use them.
So let me understand this much so far. This is a private nonprofit?
That's correct. That's
that
correct.
people donate to, or how does it get its money to do some of the things you just mentioned?
Right. A variety of ways. Many very philanthropic donors contribute to the Conservation Fund from across the country, but we also have some really great corporate partnerships and a lot of partnerships with philanthropic institutions, foundations, and we also receive some government grants, but that's probably a very small percentage of the funding that we use. So really, it's really privately driven primarily.
So your intention is to buy land. I'm saying land, what else could you buy? Buildings? I guess you could buy buildings, but that's not a focus of the fund, is it?
Well, not exactly, although when the fund first started, as it began, Pat Noonan was our president at the time, who was the chairman and president of the Nature Conservancy for a number of years. One of our first donations, in fact, was a building that a company gave to us, donated to us, and then we in turn sold that building and then used the proceeds of that sale to fund our very first conservation and land acquisition project. So that's called our Gift Lands program, which still exists, but it was really kind of a unique way at the time to begin the process of capitalizing conservation.
So you're considered a 501c3 for donation purposes?
That's right. We're a nonprofit. Our charter is really twofold. It's environmental conservation and economic development. So we do a lot of work related to economic development because we realize that unless people are economically well off, if communities are economically well off, they care more about the environment. If communities are not doing well economically, the environment's not often high on their priority list, right?
Oh, interesting. You're the first fund in the environmental field that I have run across that actually considers and respects and cares about that aspect. What do they do in that aspect, the economic aspect?
Yeah, we have a number of programs. In fact, we work with a lot of communities on protecting parkland. We realize that parkland, and you see it in our area here, is a critical attribute of communities.
Yes.
When you have parkland and trails and nature areas and biking paths, it makes it easier for people to want to come to your community. And in turn, it makes it easier for corporations and other groups to recruit people to come. So, people look at that and identify that here's a community where I want to be. It has a lot of really great attributes. Oh, and by the way, there's some companies here that we can work for. And so by that, kind of melding the economic angle and the environmental angle, we found to be a good space for us to work in.
So you're not really an economic development. You're a development of, or I don't want to say development, something to do with amenities that make physical activity in an area more available.
Right, and now having said that, we do have a couple of programs that are very much entrenched in economic development. We have an institute called the Freshwater Institution, which is on the East Coast, which primarily works in the space of aquaculture, doing research and building aquaculture systems for raising fish, for food services for different companies. We build those facilities for them.
Now, is that considered fish farming?
Fish farming, yeah, but it's
Is
all
aquaculture a different name for it?
aquaculture, fish farming, the same type of thing.
Okay.
Right now, there's a lot of discussion about offshore fish farming. This is self-contained fish farming. So an aquaculture facility that you might see in a warehouse, for example, where they're growing
Really?
perch or trout or tilapia, something like that. So it's a very environmentally friendly way to do it. In addition to that kind of work, we historically have not owned a lot of land and held a lot of land. Right now, we actually own 70,000 acres of forest land in California that we purchased to protect some streams, some habitat, but we're also brought in foresters and are actually cutting down trees on this property and then selling those trees to as proceeds for our continuing conservation work. But it's what they call a selective harvest, a sustainable harvest of timber in those forests. So we're using those dollars to kind of, really build our mission and continue our mission by raising revenue to do additional land conservation projects.
I understand that there's a life cycle of a forest and that you have to take care of it by pruning or cutting.
Right.
But then the other side said, no, you shouldn't or wouldn't or can't or... So what is the issues on both sides?
Yeah, and to answer that question appropriately, I'd bring in one of our foresters, but I can tell you this, sustainable forestry and sustainable harvest of timber is probably the healthiest way to manage a forest. If you don't, what you end up with sometimes on the one side, we see this happening today as we speak, forest fires. That will manage a forest for you if you're not careful.
Yes.
But also, some forestry companies in the past primarily would go in and just clear cut areas,
Yes.
which provides timber for the timber industry, but it also leaves a really devastated landscape, which is not good for streams and natural habitats and creates flooding and landslides and mudslides and things like that. So going in and carefully harvesting the forest and the trees that are of a certain age and time for them to be harvested makes a lot of sense.
Oh, interesting. So you would pick the land to purchase based on an interest in streams or other things?
Yeah, that's the California example. We acquired, there was a timber company that owned several pieces of property there, and we acquired that property because the concern was that the property could be sold off in many small parcels, and each parcel would then be managed differently. We were able to go in and acquire the whole parcel,
Yes,
and then manage
land.
it better. Yeah.
I see. So basically, the arc for you is get the donations in some form and then identify the land and buy it
Right.
and then turn it over to an appropriate other nonprofit. I'm feeling for words here.
Yeah,
So
that's right. That's right.
That will take care of it or use it in some
Right.
way.
In many cases, that final partner will be the federal government or a state government or another nonprofit, perhaps a land conservancy, which we have some in this area, that will then manage that property into the future. So yeah, that's one of the areas in which we work. That's been, probably our claim to fame has been real estate over time.
Oh, interesting. There just seems to be in the federal lands this tussle between don't touch anything, minimal tourists, and then the agriculture or the cattle side of
Right.
it, and there's tension.
There is tension, and I have some colleagues that work out west. There's another agency that works out west that we don't have here in Michigan. It's the Bureau of Land Management,
But that's a government agency.
That's a federal government agency, right? And they regulate the use of that land, and they do have leases for cattle. Cattle can graze the land, and they're we've seen it in the news not long ago where there is there are some conflicts between the federal government as the owner of the land and the ranchers who would like to use the land. And so that's kind of playing itself out, I think, a little bit right now. The Conservation Fund, from our perspective, we historically have acquired land, and as long as that stays open to the public, that's the sweet spot where we work. We realize that, again, going back to the economic health of communities, unless people can get out and see these lands, it's difficult for them to appreciate them. And we have to keep in mind, too, that eventually these people, and it could be kids, for example, will be voters. And we hope that these kids and these folks have an opportunity to see these properties, appreciate them, and so that when they can vote to protect them or they get in a legislative position, they can help us conserve these lands as well.
And there might be various kinds of pressure as the population increases
Sure.
due to immigration.
Right, right, absolutely. And so those are things that we all need to keep in mind as we do our work. You know, it's not a static environment. You know, obviously, immigration, regulation. You know, there's new things happening all the time. That we have a really good staff that can keep tabs on what the changes are out there in the kind of the socio-political environment, and help guide us through the places where we want to work.
Oh, that is really interesting. So places like the Nature Conservancy, they're more of an advocacy group, or they're a management of land group?
Yeah, a lot of the things that we do are very similar to the Nature Conservancy. In fact, until 1985, we were part of the Nature Conservancy.
Oh.
The way that we're different is that we don't have a membership. The Nature Conservancy tends to be a membership-based organization.
I see.
We're a much smaller organization. I think we were designed to not have a larger bureaucracy that would be
Yes.
held up by membership and trying to feed that membership.
Yes.
And so we tend to be, I think, you know, one of the more nimble environmental groups and conservation organizations. You know, only having 150 staff across the country allows us, I think, a little flexibility, allows us to be
like that.
a little more entrepreneurial, I think, from time to time. So we do many things that are similar to the Nature Conservancy. We actually provide, we actually have a loan fund. We provide loans to groups like the Nature Conservancy, or even locally here in the Midland area, the Little Forks Conservancy or the Saginaw Basin Land Conservancy, to help groups acquire land to protect. We just recently did a loan with a local group, the Little Forks Conservancy, to acquire some land along the Tittabawassee River, which was significant for that ecosystem. It allows them to purchase and protect the land and then pay us back over a course of a few years. So it allows them to build their own capacity, do fundraisers to pay us back. And it's been a great tool for conservation as well.
You know, everybody believes in what they're doing, but how do you know enough is enough?
Right.
That, you know, it seems once you get into the stream, or the desert, there's always more to do.
Sure.
But how do you balance with, well, maybe we've,
Right, right.
you know, this is maybe a B or C idea, but
Right.
useful doing, but we really did a lot in that area, or
Sure.
whatever. What's the thought process
Yeah,
on that?
a lot of the work that we do is very partner driven. You know, we tend to take a back seat quite often and help partners achieve what they want to achieve. What we found out, you know, the most successful groups, land conservancies, for example, have done a lot of work on a prioritization basis. Funds for land acquisition are scarce. They're hard to raise. And so when a local group wants to do that kind of work, it makes a lot of sense for them to have their own list that said, these are our A parcels and these are our B and C parcels. And we tend to get involved in the A parcels, and typically those are identified because of a significant ecosystem issue. They're protecting streams. They have some really important environmental and habitat features. But you're right. I mean, it can be a slippery slope. But at what point do you stop? At what point do you say enough is enough? And we tend to let our groups guide us. I mean, if they're very passionate about a particular parcel, then we're willing to help.
Oh, and then you have the Watershed Initiative.
Right.
Tell us something about that.
Yeah, locally, the Saginaw Bay Watershed Initiative Network has been a project that we've been working on since 1998, along with some great partners, a number of local foundations, some corporate partners led by and large by the Dow Chemical Company was involved with us at the very beginning and still very much involved. It's a sustainability initiative. We work with a number of funders that provide funding to us, and then we re-grant those dollars.
I see.
All of the projects that we grant dollars for have to have an environmental, and economic, and a community component to them. So we get involved a lot in non-motorized trail systems, a lot of ecosystem projects, lots of really good things. And we've been doing it since 1998, so it's you know, nearly 20 years. So it's been a great project.
So you were a city manager.
I was. I did a tour of duty, yes.
What do you do now and what do you do then that's similar?
Well, a lot of what I do now and what I did then is talking to people, engaging with people, finding out what their priorities are and how we can help. It's one of the key jobs of being a city manager, and I'm going to let the secret out here. 90% of it is just being able to get along with people and understand what their needs are and helping them meet those needs, and building win-win situations for everybody. That's a lot of what we do at the Conservation Fund and the Saginaw Bay Wind Program, where we see folks or groups that are perhaps struggling. They know what they want, they see what they want at the end of the tunnel, but they just don't know how to get there. And whether that's funding, whether that's technical support, that's where we come in and provide them that help. We have a number of people across the country. There aren't too many issues that we haven't seen or something similar that we can't help out, whether it's how to raise funds or whether it's technical support in terms of how do you put together a land deal. How do you build a new canoe launch? I mean, we do a lot of public recreation or access work, and so we're able to come in with a very small crew and help some groups do some pretty amazing things.
Talk to me a little bit about getting along with people. I
Right.
mean, who raised you? And what did they tell you? What
Right.
did you learn along the way?
I think a lot of that comes from my mom and dad. I grew up right here in Bay City, so not too far away from our studio here, and that was one of the lessons that I took with me as I became a city manager. A city manager is a very unique position. It's one of those positions where if the phone rings, it's not often somebody calling you to tell you what a great job you're doing. I think about it as maybe a superintendent of schools or something similar, where if the phone rings, it's usually somebody that has a concern about something. Either the city's doing something wrong or their neighbor is doing something wrong, and they're calling you for help. And 9 times out of 10, they just want somebody to listen to them and get that off their chest, and maybe you can come up with some ideas or some ways that you can help them. And that's what I've tried to do, and I think that's what I call getting along. Being able to talk to people and come up with some solutions that make everybody happy. And I think that all starts with listening. Being able to listen to folks and understand what their concerns are and take them seriously, because they really feel that those are serious concerns. They wouldn't be calling you.
How do you say no gracefully?
Saying no is tough, right? One of the things that I've learned, because we run a grant program, we have a limited number of dollars that we can grant to projects, and we can't fund them all, and they may all be great projects, and so there's a bit of an art, I think, to saying no and making your partner feel good about that. And so I think that's difficult, but one of the things that we do is say perhaps we don't have funding for something, but we might know of somewhere that does, and help them, because if we truly believe in the project, funding tends to help come to projects that people believe in, and often we'll be able to help them.
So if I heard you just now, what you're really saying is take them further down the path they wish to go.
Yeah.
Even if you can't open the door to what precisely they wanted.
Sure, and our Saginaw Bay project has been a great example of that, and the funders that we've worked with. It's been a very transparent process, and we've been able to bring in bring in some small groups that have not had experience in the philanthropic community before, and introduce them to people. And it's a different audience, and it has its own language, and sometimes we can help those people get to folks that may be able to help them with their projects. And it's not always funding. I mean, sometimes it's advice, and being able to put folks in touch with the right people to provide the right advice, I think is a role that we've played, and a role that I've tried to play. Building those bridges between people that want to get something done but don't know how to do it, and putting them in touch with the people that might be able to help them get it done.
I visited Crystal Bridges, which is an art museum in Northwest Arkansas, really funded by the Walmart family, and one in particular. But they have a lot of land around this, and they have trails and this and that. No waste paper baskets, no trash baskets.
Is that right?
And people come in, they have their picnic, whatever they use, they take back out. What experience do you have with expectation and people's action?
Yeah, that's a good example. In fact, right here in Michigan, our own DNR has tried that example in a number of parks, and it's been related mainly to staffing. They have some very isolated parks, and they don't have the staff to take care of them. So, if you don't provide the trash receptacle, people are forced to take it with them. Maybe that's the hope anyway. And I think by and large, it's worked. Expectations are interesting, because they're difficult to balance, sometimes difficult to manage, and difficult to understand what people's expectations are. When I was working for the city, you didn't know if the expectation was that, somebody needed help right now or it was something that could wait.
Yeah.
If it's a big project, a small project, it's really, again, communication, I think, in trying to manage what those expectations are and how you can be most helpful. I think communication is really the key, whether it's communicating that people need to bring their trash out of the woods with them when they come out, or simply communicating that you may have the ability to help them do something, I think has been key.
I wish you'd incorporate in the environment how people treat each other. It used to be called good manners.
You're right.
But
You're right.
Consideration or helpfulness or
Sure.
whatever the nomenclature, the wording is now.
Right.
I think that would be a nice addition if you don't already do it.
I think that's a good point, and I think we've worked on a number of projects, particularly non-motorized trails or mountain bike trails or kayak trails, what they call blue water trails, and there are lots of kayaks around these days. And each community is very unique. The kayakers, the mountain bikers, and both of them. I can speak to mountain bikers in particular. Really care for the sites where they mountain bike. They have a real belief in stewardship, and I think a lot of these groups do. So again, it's getting people out, getting them out to care about the areas that they like and that they like to use, knowing that if they don't, that opportunity may no longer be available. So we like to work with groups like that and encourage groups like that.
Yeah, in New York, I was almost hit on 2 different occasions by bicyclists. Not that they should be licensed, but when there's a red light, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't, in
Right.
my way as a
Sure.
pedestrian looking at it. But I'm dodging, and they're gone, so there's no way for me to say, "Una momento, could we discuss this again?"
Right.
Ring a bell or do so, stop for the light. Do you get involved in any of those discussions, or is that not something?
Not so much biking in the inner city, but I think that those types of discussions are interesting. We're having some broad discussions right now about how you balance interest between different groups. In particular, in Midland down the road, we've done some projects related to providing all access opportunities for kayakers and canoeists, and not just able-bodied folks, but folks that may have some type of disability. And so we're trying to bring together various groups and prepare win-win situations for both of them. How can we build an access to the river that's going to do the best or be the best for the greatest number of people? And so again, that communication, I think, is important. Bringing as many groups as you can to the table. You may not get all of the groups all the time, but certainly bringing the more people you can, the better, to the table to help them understand that we want to craft something here that's going to be good for everybody.
How do you lead a meeting when people are vociferous from their point of view and they need to hear and perhaps modulate that to include concerns of others from other groups in the meeting?
Right. Quite often I think we find that people just don't understand what other folks' concerns are and have not heard the concerns articulated. Often we'll work with a group that says, well, I know these folks aren't going to like that idea for one reason or another, without even talking to the other party. They're already of the understanding that there's a group out there that's going to be against it. But when you bring those groups together quite often, and you're able to facilitate some communication, usually a lot of the concerns are not as full blown as what either group thought they were, and there's usually opportunities to work together. Non-motorized trails are a really good example, where you may have a trail that runs adjacent to somebody's property, and sometimes the reaction is, I don't want that trail near my property because people are going to throw their garbage on my property. We've heard that time and time again. It almost never happens. Usually the people that use the trails are some of the best stewards of the environment and the trail system itself. But there's initially some concern. But I think that we use a lot of really good examples about how trails have worked in other areas and how they can work locally and why they're important and why, frankly, why they can benefit you. I think if you look in Midland, you have at least one ice cream parlor that's now developed along the Pure Marquette Trail and become kind of an economic development opportunity. So bringing people together, I think, to have those conversations, I think, is certainly the first step. Sounds easy, right?
Well, we could put you ahead of any organization because, as you say, we all have to, pull it together.
Right.
Anyway, thank you very much, Mike. So we have learned a lot. And it all centers on basically the same thing, and that's respect for the people you intersect with. And part of his job, 90% of his job as city manager, was to hear and get along, to solve the problem or take it down depending on if it was just blowing steam or whatever. Similarly, in his job now, there's a good way to say no. Now, we're not talking about abuse here and stuff like that, but on things that are passionate for people, that are okay, if you can't help them, give them an idea or a suggestion of someone else who might help them. That's a very useful, because that upgrades everybody. We can't say yes, not only financially, but time-wise and otherwise for everything. So that's an example of being helpful, which I'm very keen on. And the other thing is to bring disparate people together and ask them to listen, to be the city manager, as it were, and to hear people out and not interrupt and not make life more difficult by blocking their conversation. One of the great things you can teach people in your life is to listen. And what I mean is not just hear, but listen from the inside, to ask, what are they trying to say beyond the words? What is the issue? And he is saying that if you can do that, that very often it raises everything because the understanding level goes high. So worth a try, worth something to consider and have in your life. So as you go out this week, remember, do something kind for someone you know and someone you don't know, and do it every day, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in.
To contact Junia, send her an email at info@juniadone.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadone.com. Thanks for joining us. See you next time for Uncommon Sense with Junia Doan.
Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.